l'enfant.
Hello, everyone. Lots of people in this room, so it's a bit impressive. Apologies if I sound a bit shaking at the beginning. Vladimir told me that there would be two types of people in the room. So I don't know Vladimir a lot, so I'm gonna actually test if this is true. So he told me there would be people that work in startups, people that are interested in product. Let's raise your hand if you're in the first category, which means you work in a startup. Raise your hand high. Okay, thank you. Can you raise your hand if you belong to the second category, which means you're a product manager, owner, designer? Okay. Is anyone in the third category? There is. So there are a couple of honest people. Good. So I promised Vladimir that would mostly focus on the first two categories, but if you're in the third category, there will be a couple of slides for you. So every single time you see this purple background, forget about what I'm saying, the message is for you. All right? I will pretend to be talking about product or startup. I am talking for you. All right? So I hope people are good in geography. We're going to do a very quick quiz. Do you know what is the distance between New Zealand and France? It's not a tricky question. So who thinks the distance is 10,000 kilometers? 20,000 kilometers? 40,000 kilometers? And maybe you're already wondering what you're doing here. Thank you. Another honest person. So the answer is 20,000 kilometers. It's basically, the furthest away you could be from France when you're in New Zealand. So I was lucky to do a trip in New Zealand for a couple of weeks. And you could wonder what memories you get from such a trip, from such a different country. And you would think that, I could mention about the skydive, about, above an amazing lake, about a landscape that looks like in your, the Hobbit land. I could talk about the glacier that is going into the sea. I could talk about a long hike along empty beaches. But actually the best memory I have, the most striking memory is this. And very specifically, actually, it's this little detail. Now, you might be wondering what is there. I cannot zoom, so I'm going to explain to you. This is where the emergency instructions of that boat are, right? I'm really sorry, I didn't take a picture, but this is what was written on the emergency instructions. If the captain dies or falls in the water, first you should turn off the engine, then you should pick up the red phone, and 3, you should wait for instructions. Now, you might be wondering, why would you fly, 28 hours, to another country, and that's your only memory? Well, I'm sorry for this. I'm, a bit of a geek, but also at the time I was reading a book called The Checklist Manifesto, and this book explains how checklists can save lives. What I mean by this is it's a book that studies how surgeons and airplane pilots and construction workers use playlists as a way to, improve how they work and improve how they avoid to, screw up when they're, driving a plane or doing a surgery operations. So I was aware of that book, and I had a lot of things in mind. And the second reason why I was obsessed about this emergency instructions is actually what I just showed you is not exactly what was on the instruction. There was another detail. There was actually one first instruction that I'm not going to reveal right now, so you're going to have to work a bit. There was one particular instructions, right? And the book explains a lot about how those instructions are made. The way they're made is that they actually come up with the instructions that seems to be the most relevant for a situation. In this case, the captain, is actually not available. They put it into production, and if an accident happens, they study what happened. And if actually, there was a major accident and people didn't follow, they iterate, right? So I am 100% convinced that this first instruction was not in the first version of this list of instructions. It must have been after one iteration, right? So that's your clue. if you're bored for the rest of the presentation, just try to figure out this problem. What could be the first step, right? I'm not going to tell you right now. I will tell you a bit later. So let's talk about who I am. My name is Rémi. I've been working for different types of companies. Sécurité Solaire is a tiny non-profit organization for employees in the health sector. PayPal, who was part of eBay at the time, 40,000 people in the finance industry, and today I work at BlaBlaCar, which is roughly 400 people in the transport domain. And the common thing that I've seen over those years is how much complexity is everywhere, and I've always been very uncomfortable with this, and I've been trying to bring simplicity into the things that I do at work, and it always has been an obsession of mine. And when you are interested in the tech sector about simplicity, there is one piece of advice that you're going to see very often. It's this one. You should keep it simple, stupid. So first, it's very interesting that a piece of advice actually ends with an insult. I don't know what's the story behind that, but the idea behind this one is things start simple, and then over time it gets more complex, right? So if you have this in mind, if you're trying to keep it simple, then the idea is that you should actually just try to avoid going into the danger zone, which is complexity. So whenever you do a step in the direction of complexity, just take a step back and don't go there. And at the time, I was working at PayPal, and I was actually working with a designer called Tristan Charvilla. I'm lucky to continue to work with him today, still at BlaBlaCar. And we came up with this a very weird metaphor that I'm not going to cover right now, but the key idea was whenever someone is talking to you about a very specific corner case, just ignore it, right? So just focus, whatever product you're working on, just focus on the major use case, right? Forget about everything else. That's a way to avoid complexity. You just focus on what seems to be the main use case, and that's it, right? And the VP of design of PayPal at the time, who was called Ulrich da Costa, actually was very interested by this obsession about simplicity and was like, it's interesting what you're saying about use cases, but you should go deeper, you should spread this obsession a bit further. So I actually started to be even more obsessed than I was about simplicity. I came up with a very weird framework. I got a bit lost. And over those years, this is what I understood. Keep it simple is actually a very bad piece of advice if you want to, if your goal is simplicity. And the funny thing is, it's a very bad piece of advice exactly for the same reason that the first instruction had to be iterated on. So let's come back to those instructions. Did anyone figure out or wants to just, try what could be on that first step? Yes. Don't try and rescue the captain. No. But no, it's a good guess. It's a good guess, please. Don't panic. Okay, interesting. Read the instructions. No. Learn English. Interesting. No. Don't drive the boat. Okay. So, I'm sure some of them would have been helpful, maybe. It turns out that the one that they added, the one instruction they added, and this is a true story, is this one. So just think for a second, why did they feel the need to add accept the situation? And actually it's pretty obvious. If the captain dies and you don't want to accept it, you're not going to follow the instruction because the instructions actually ask you to go in the captain's cabin. So you need to accept the situation. And I think it's exactly the same thing about keep it simple. I think keep it simple is refusing to accept a fundamental situation in life. I think this is actually the wrong way of looking at simplicity and complexity because it's refusing to accept a key situation. That's the situation. Let me insist. Things are complex from the start. That's the reality that if you ignore it, you're screwed. So things are complex from the start. Let's look at someone who does not accept the situation and looks like someone who has fully accepted the situation. Now, this person is not happy, but trust me, this person has accepted that things are complex from the start. And I think this is a much better description of, the relationship between complexity and simplicity. Things start very complex, and if someone actually puts the effort in, they may become much simpler. The reason why I'm insisting so much before going into more practical details is because if you actually don't look at it this way, then you're going to refuse to actually look at complexity. You're going to refuse to try to deal with it. What I was describing earlier as the danger zone, I actually call it the battlefield. This is where things happen. So if you care about simplicity, you should be fighting it. And that's the topic of today. And what I want to share with you is a couple of ideas that we've been putting in place at BlaBlaCar that actually help you fight complexity. The thing is about, if it's a fight is tiring. And actually it means you need to be super motivated, and maybe that doesn't scale very much. So the way I look at it is what you need to develop is what I would call complexity antibodies. So things that, inside the system you're in are constantly going to fight complexity on your behalf. So that's much more scalable as a method. One second about BlaBlaCar, why all those complexity fighting matter at the time. And I'm talking about what happened in the past 2 years. At the time, BlaBlaCar was 10 years old. We had scaled from 1 country to 22 countries, from 1 user to 60 million. We had tried a lot of business models, and they were not the same in all the markets. And we realized that we became slow. And we became slow because we had built something that was way more complex than needed. So in order to gain speed, in order to innovate again, we had to actually simplify a lot of things. So this is why, at the time at BlaBlaCar, my obsession, found a good home. I was also very lucky to work with someone called Benjamin Retourné, who's our most senior product manager at BlaBlaCar. And that's his Twitter profile. He calls himself a simplifier. And I think that's a great testimony of how much he contributed to a lot of the things that I'm going to share right now. So I'm going to talk about 3 situations that as a product or as a startup person you can find yourself into. And then I'll talk about what solution you can bring, what is the complexity antibody that you can actually bring to the table. So one is about roadmap request. So someone wants to add a project to your roadmap. Another one is talking about interface design. And the last one is how do you handle user feedback. So let's focus, let's talk about the first one, which we called phonetic focus. So I'm gonna need Vladimir. Where is Vladimir? I'm gonna need your help. Vladimir right now is going to be my assistant. I don't know if you know anything about this guy, Pythagoras. So he's famous from this, triangle theorem. But actually, he's also very famous because he invented a very special cup. So you're about to see a very weird demonstrations. Vladimir, could you pick up the bucket over there, please? And maybe put it on this chair. Thank you. All right. So, it's a metaphor. Imagine that this cup, right? The capacity of this cup is your roadmap, right? Is how many projects you can actually do in 1 year, let's say, okay? So you could say it's the amount of developers, you have, for example. This water is ideas, right? Is things you want to do, right? And there's more water here than what can fill in this cup, right? So you would think that you have to make some decisions. What happens usually is most people are gonna want to try to, put as many ideas in the roadmap, right? So as a VP product, I'm gonna actually say, hey, we can't put everything, but everyone has a different idea and everyone is fighting for a different one. So I want to show you right now why you should be careful about how many ideas you put into your roadmap. Can you put it a bit up? Yeah. So this cup is interesting because when you put a bit of water, nothing happens. When you put a bit more project onto your roadmap, everything is fine. Now we're starting to get close to the full capacity of the roadmap. Of course, everyone wants to get their project, so we're going to put a bit more. As a VP product, it's my responsibility to tell you that I think now we have way more than what we could do. But hey, there's pressure, there's deadlines, we have commitment, we have partners. Can we try to put a bit more? And this is what happens. What is left of your roadmap is almost nothing. Now, if you want to understand how this cup works, look it up on the internet. Thank you, Vladimir. And this metaphor is the reason why you don't want to put too many things, and the reason why you need phonetic focus. You need to choose very specifically the things that are going to be there on your roadmap. So I'm going to call out a very famous designer called Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett came up with a method of prioritization that is extremely simple, and I bet that you would struggle to put it in place. But let's give it a try. His idea is the following one. First, you should list your top 10 goals. It could be for you, it could be for your company. List the top things that matter for you, right? The most important things, the things you really want to accomplish, okay? Now, the second thing you need to do is pick the 3 most important ones. The ones that you cannot miss, the one you cannot afford not to do, the things that on this list really are core to your heart. And that should be a difficult choice. It might take a bit of time. Now you have 2 lists, right? You have one list, which is the 3 goals we selected, and you have a second list where you have all the other very important goals that we talked about. The first list, you can call it your company priorities. What is the name of the second list? In most companies, we call it secondary priorities, right? The things that you're not focusing on right now, but they're very important, you have to try to accomplish them. What Warren Buffett calls this list is the things you should avoid at all costs. Because these are the things that are going to be the distraction from the top 3 things that you described. And this is something that at BlaBlaCar we've been much better recently than in the previous years, is having this phonetic focus. Now, this is hard. Like the method is simple, doing it is very hard. I'll just share one example of one of those decisions we had to do. BlaBlaCar is about carpooling. Carpooling is about putting people in the car of a stranger, right? So the amount of trust that BlaBlaCar as a platform needs to put in place in order for people to do this is crazy. So trust is a major topic at BlaBlaCar. Trust is the reason why we probably, are a carpooling platform that is, available in so many countries and so successful. Yet, when we decided to choose a couple of categories, priorities, trust was in the second list. And there was a lot of debate around this. And yet, in the past years, we have developed very, very, very little energy on this topic. And every time we do, we try to remember how much this is a topic we should avoid at all costs, not because it's not important, because it's just not part of our top 3 priorities. So every single time someone comes to me with a roadmap request, my answer is no. Actually, my answer is not no. My answer is the polite version of no, which looks like this. It means no, but it acknowledges that we're not working on something and that this topic is important. And I realized over years that actually saying no this way is much more efficient. That's for phonetic focus. Let's move on to the next method. One key thing, if you want to put yourself on a scale of where your company stands, level 0 of priorities is when you don't have any. Level 1 is when you have clear priorities. Level 2 is when you think you have priorities, but actually everyone in your company is aligned with this. And level 3 is what I described, is when no one else is working on anything else. Figure out where you stand and figure out how could you reach the next level. Let's talk about simplification reviews. So I'm sure you only work in amazing companies that have amazing applications and there's not a pixel too much. It turns out that at BlaBlaCar a couple of years ago, we had some of our screens were a bit cluttered. So this is the screen that you would reach when you're looking for a trip, and we display a couple of results, and you have to pick one. There's a lot of things going on here. And how can you simplify it? And the reason why we wanted to simplify the screen is because we realized that we wanted actually to add more things to the screen. So that was a problem. We're not sure how can we add something even though it's already very complex. So the metaphor we've been using is this one. So look at this beautiful horse and look at this poor camel. It feels like it's a horse, but a lot of people had a lot of different ideas about what a horse should look like. You end up with a camel. The reason why it's an interesting metaphor is because the horse, as a word, actually, as an acronym, contains the 5 ways you can simplify your screen. So this is a framework that actually, with a couple of people, came up with. There's only 5 ways you can simplify a screen. And I'll just describe them right now. You can hide things, you can organize things, you can reduce them, you can standardize them, or you can erase them. This is very theoretical, so let's go into let's apply it to the screen that I just shared. At the top, you have a link to actually go to your inbox. This is something that we want to keep. Maybe it's not necessary to have it on the search result page. So we're going to keep it, but we're going to hide it from that screen. The email alert is basically a feature that allows you, when you search for some results, but you didn't get the ride you were looking for, and you want to actually get an alert when better rides are going to come up. So let's say you're trying to book a week in advance. You say, okay, maybe I won't book right now because the perfect ride is not there. Send me an alert when there is a better ride for me. This is interesting because it makes no sense to put it above the results. Asking for an email alert is something you're going to do after scrolling to all the results. So we're going to organize it differently. We're going to put this email alert at the very bottom of all the results. So we're going to organize them differently. Reducing, if you look at the price, £14 per seat. Actually, the information is fundamental to this card, but maybe we can just say £14. I mean, what else are we selling? We're just selling seats. So instead of saying £14 per seat, we just reduce that, £14. Standardize. We have a couple of icons that, if you're not familiar with BlaBlaCar, won't mean a thing, but are trying to, give you information, very quick information about, what type of ride is this. And it turns out they have very different colors, very different design. So we're going to try to standardize them. And the last thing is, we're trying to here tell you about how many seats are left. It turns out that actually most people, when they book a BlaBlaCar, they're booking for 1 seat. And if this card is up, it means 1 seat is available. So it's an information that is not very useful. So we're going to raise it. So if we apply all of those, and actually if we continue to apply some of those methods to the screen, this is what it's going to look like. So this is a real exercise we did. This is the real screen that we came up with. And the interesting thing is, now we have some room to add something. The one thing we wanted to add was, when you look at all the rides, there might be one that actually is very convenient for you, because BlaBlaCar is a transport network that has departure station all over the map, right? When you take a train, there's maybe one train station in your city. When you take a BlaBlaCar, the departure point could be anywhere. So maybe one in particular is going to be super useful. So we're like, what we need to push forward is an information about proximity, how close or how far the departure point is from where I live. So one idea we had was, this is what it could look like. Actually, there were two trips, one going from Paris to Rouen, the other one too, but one is super close to me. That's why it has green indicator. The other one, actually, the departure and arrival points are much further away, so that's why they're in orange and red. This is a piece of information that would be very hard to put on the first version of the screen. Actually, if we try, I'm not even sure you would see it. It's exactly the same size of circles, by the way, and it would be totally cluttered. So this is why sometimes you want to simplify in order to magnify the things that really matter. So this was the second technique, simplification reviews. The last one is what I call absence testing. So testing the absence of something. If we actually focus on the same screen, the first reaction of any employee at BlaBlaCar when we show them this screen is, where are the ratings? As I said before, BlaBlaCar is a platform that is relying on trust. So when people rate one another, that increases the level of trust, and you know you can actually book a ride because you can access to the ratings of that person. Basically, the trust is created by the community. So whenever we talk about, hey, we're not going to work on trust, huge backlash internally. When we say we're going to launch this version of the search result, huge question about where are the ratings. The ratings could look like this. So you could display the average mean, and you could actually display the amount of ratings that are displayed. In this situation, right, when you're a bit hesitant, there's a debate inside your team about this particular thing, we're not sure if we should actually put it, if we should keep it. What most people would do is actually get feedback from users, right? And you would say, okay, let's actually show this version of the screen to users, and let's see their reaction, and based on this, we can take a decision. I believe this is the wrong approach. What you should test is the absence of ratings in this particular case. Why? Because if we show this screen to users, not a single user is going to tell us this piece of information is useless. I've attended more than 500 usability testing. I've never heard someone saying this particular thing is useless to me. However, if we show them the screen without the ratings and they need it or they miss it, they will tell you about it. This is why you should test the absence, not the presence of things that you're hesitant about. This is what we did. We actually did some usability testing. So we bring users, we ask them to execute a task with a new prototype with the screen that I just described, and we see if they're able to complete the task. Two interesting insights. The first one is, not a single regular user noticed that we didn't have ratings. Now, to be clear, ratings were available on the application. Actually, if you click on any card, you're going to see the ratings of the driver. But on this screen, they don't need it. Why? Because when they're actually doing a comparison between multiple trips, ratings come in a second level of priority. First, they're going to care about the time, the place of departure, and the price. Ratings only come as a discrimination once you have done a selection of 2 or 3 rides. So it makes total sense to put the ratings on the next screen, not on this one. The other very interesting insight was we actually put this new screen, and there were a couple of other changes on other pages in production to measure the impact, which means to measure the impact of removing stuff, right? Which is very counterintuitive if you think about it. Most of the things you're doing, I'm assuming, are about adding stuff to your product. We did the other way around. What happened? The conversion went up. We remove information, the conversion goes up. And these are the kind of things that you have to test because they're very counterintuitive. Probably they're going to generate a lot of debate. A good way to have, information that is relevant to your debate is to remove stuff and see what happens. So this is a recap of all the things I've been talking about. First, you should accept that the things are complex from the start. Then you should not avoid complexity, you should try to fight it. And in order to fight it, you should invest in things that are going to scale, what I call complexity antibodies. And there's 3 techniques that I described: phonetic focus, simplification reviews, and absent testing. Now, if there is someone in the crowd that actually wants to go a bit further, I have 3 recommendations. One is a book called Insanely Simple. This book is talking about how much this obsession for simplicity at Apple has made them successful. There's a report that came out last year about how companies that actually focus on simplicity perform better. So if you're looking either for inspiration or for data points about how much simplicity has an impact on business, there's a lot of information in this report. And the last one is a movie called Nothing, which is very weird, a bit awkward, a bit funny movie about what happens when you give the power to 2 idiots. You give them the power to remove stuff, right? So they start with the world and they end up with nothing. It's a bit weird, so I'm not sure everyone is going to like it, but it gives you a lot of inspiration about, you know, how far you can go. I promised that would be, you know, slides for people in the 3rd category, people who have anxiety issues. I have too. This is why I attend conferences. And what I do when my anxiety level goes too high, I take out a notebook and I write what I call my worry list, all the things that are in my head, right? And then I apply the simplification framework, HORSE, right? What in my life could I hide? What in my life could I organize differently? What could I reduce? And it's crazy because you would think that, you know, you wouldn't need such a, you know, obvious tool to actually help reduce stress. I don't know, you know, for you, but for me it's been extremely helpful. So if anyone was looking for the secret of life, I don't think that's it, but, you know, give it a try. And happy to answer any questions.
Question, everybody?
Hi. Sorry. So my question was, so you talked about how you simplified the interface at BlaBlaCar. That was the example. What was the objective of it? Was it a will from the company, or was it your project that you sold, and how?
So the topic of simplification was in the air at BlaBlaCar. So I can't say that, you know, we were explicitly talking about it, but what we were explicitly talking about is how slow we were becoming. And whenever we're trying to think, okay, why are we slow? The notion of complexity looked like it was the root cause of that. So I guess that was the starting point, right? We're slow. Why? Because we have built a product that is too complex. And this is where definitely I realized that I had a role to play. And I think the role that I played was twofold. Was to raise awareness about, you know, where complexity is coming from. Because you'll notice something funny, but no one thinks they're responsible for the complexity. It's always everyone else, right? You're doing things good, but other people are making it complex, which, you know, seems a bit surprising. So raise the awareness about, you know, why complexity, where is it coming from and what you can do about it. So that was raising awareness. The other one was bringing ways of working, methods. So I haven't shared all the ones we've been using, but sharing method like this. So the idea of the cup is something that actually I've shared with the whole company during a meeting like this. We have been implementing simplification reviews at the end of the design phase of any project. So these are real things that we implemented, and today they're part of the culture. So when I talk about antibodies, that's what I mean. You know, you have antibodies, you know, inside your body. You don't spend any effort actually fueling them, right? And they're happening automatically. This is what happens when you invest in a culture of, you know, simplification to the max. So yeah, this is how it happened. Raising awareness and then providing techniques and repeating that a lot. I think there's a question here and here.
In the process of hiding certain UI elements, you end up having more traversals from one page to another, which might frustrate then the end user. So how do we solve it?
You might have what?
For example, in the earlier slide, you try to hide certain aspects of UI elements, but what it ends up happening is then you might have to traverse for one particular information from one page to another. For example, you might need to change the location or destination. You need to click on the text box, it throws you in next page, and then you need to enter and then go back. So that creates time for traversing from one page to another, which might irritate the user. So how do we solve it?
Yeah. So definitely there is a lot of hard choices that come with those radical decisions, right? And I guess the key thing is knowing what you're optimizing for. And I think that the way you do this is what I shared a bit earlier. I think the notion of what is the main use case is key. For example, if the main use case is people are going to type an address, are going to type a search intent, and then they're going to see result, and then they're going to change it, then maybe you want to optimize for that. And then maybe the first screen was a bit better. If actually what most people do is actually when they enter their departure and destination, it's not going to change, then maybe it's okay to hide it a bit more. And I think that's the key thing. You're never going to create a screen that is going to solve all the problems. So you're going to have to prioritize the ones that you care about the most. And I think one of the biggest enemy of simplicity is the camel, is trying to satisfy everyone, right? So the screen that I shared, has generated a lot of frustration inside BlaBlaCar, and actually that's usually a good thing. I mean, not a good thing. It's a good sign. Like I've been fighting internally at BlaBlaCar that we should have a value that says simplify till it hurts, right? This is what I think, if it's not hurting, if it's not difficult, you're probably not doing it right. So the fact that you have, you're looking at it and you're saying, hey, you know what, in this particular situation, it might actually be a bit, inefficient for some users. Okay, good feedback. Let's talk about it. Let's have a debate, because now we're touching the edges of this approach, and this is where the real conversation starts. If you're not having difficult conversation about the roadmap, about design, about user feedback, it's unlikely that you're actually fighting complexity. So it's a good feedback.
Yeah.
Hello, about phonetic focus. When you are a startup at early stage, when you still don't have your product market fit, you are always changing your goals, right? Because you don't know what your clients needs. So how could you deal with that, about prioritization?
I think that the difference when you're in a very young startup, or when you're working on a project in a bigger company, but this project is very young, I don't think it changes the phonetic focus. What it changes is how fast maybe this focus is going to change. What I mean by this is, at a given time, you still need to be obsessed about the very few things. Now, maybe you are obsessed about this, and it's because you're obsessed, you're going fast, and because you go fast, you learn much more quickly. Maybe you realize that your focus was the wrong one. Then you pivot, then you abandon those ideas, and they come into the avoid at all cost list, and now you focus on other things. So I don't think it's changing the phonetic focus. What I think is changing when you're in a very early stage is maybe the speed at which you learn that the topics that you chose were not the right one. I think the issue is not about whether or not you're staying true at a given, over time to your priorities, but what matters a lot is at a given time you should be focused on very few things. So this is how I would approach it.
Yes. Hi. So one question regarding simplicity and complexity or priority. because actually, don't you afraid that removing maybe lots of functionalities or keeping very few functionality, that competitors, I don't know, BlaBlaCar, if you have real competitors here in France, but competitors will would actually get your end customer, right? So what is the limit actually? Because it is maybe BlaBlaCar, you don't have real competitors, so it's easy to say we're making simple, you have time, but if you have real competitors, it's not that easy.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one, the report that I was sharing earlier about what happens when companies are obsessed by simplicity, how do they perform? Read the report. You'll discover that actually, from a business standpoint, it is extremely wise to be obsessed by simplicity. In the case of BlaBlaCar, we don't have that many direct competitors. We have a lot of indirect competitors. So actually, from a customer standpoint, whether it's carpooling, whether it's a train, whether it's a bus, for them, they can actually choose one or the other. So if we don't deliver on their expectations, they're going to choose another one. So we do have a kind of competition. I think that how do you know? How do you know is by being obsessed by your customers. So the answer is not by looking at your product, by looking at the interface, is by looking at what people need. And again, by looking at what most people need. I think the reason why you end up with a complex product is then you start to add something whenever someone might need it, versus everyone is going to need to be able to enter departure and destination. There's no debate. The ratings, maybe some do, maybe some don't, maybe everyone does, not on this stage. So and the reason why I came up with this framework of horse is to add a bit of subtlety about simplification. Like if you don't have it, the only way you simplify something is you erase it. I think sometimes you can't erase it because some people need it. The notion of hiding it is saying, hiding it is very interesting for power user features that don't apply for most people, right? So the feature is there, it's just not in your face for most people. The notion of reducing something means, yes, you continue to have it, maybe it doesn't have to take that much space. So actually, if you look at what I described, the two screens, there's not that many features we removed, right? Most of the things were still there. We just tried to optimize them for a new form that was simpler to apprehend for most people.
Hi, Rémi. Thank you for your talk. My question is, what are the struggles you've encountered during your fight against complexity? Like maybe internally inside the product team or within the organization, I don't know.
I think fear is something that you see a lot when you take that fight. Fear of missing out, right? Fear of missing a feature. Fear of removing something that actually is fundamental. So that was one resistance that was there a lot. It's a habit change. Like in most product environment, the habit is to add things. So when you start to deconstruct this and say we should remove stuff, it's actually just counterintuitive and you don't even know how to talk about this. Like how do you have roadmap items that are, we should remove something. Like in the past 2 years, we have removed, I don't know, 40, 50 features. Those were items that were not on the roadmap before. Like at one point we had more removing stuff and adding stuff on our roadmap. You have to develop a vocabulary around this. You have to measure the impact of removing something, which is something you're not used to do. So there was a bit of, driving change, and change is always, driving a bit of resistance. I think those were the main two. The fear of missing out and change of habit between adding and removing. Those are the first two that come to my mind.
You answered the question about early stage projects, which is a nice question. Obviously, you've been working on mature projects. I was wondering if you could tell us about your experience in how often the phonetic focus to list would change over time.
So those three priorities, what we have at BlaBlaCar right now, haven't changed for the past 18 months. So one of them that I shared earlier is called Pro. So this one is about developing a new offer on BlaBlaCar, which is offering a professional offer. It started as a key priority. It led to acquiring WeBuzz. So that's what happens when you're pretty focused. You can actually do big things. We are right now at the moment where we are asking that questions. Are those 3 priorities still the right ones? Because we have a very long list, and it's not 7 topics on this avoid at all cost list. And every single week, someone in the company, most people in the company don't talk to me about the things we work on. They talk to me about why are we not working on this other topic. And I have I'm a living frustration roadmap, right? And right now we are having this discussion. Are those 3 priorities the right ones, or do we double down on them? So past 18 months never changed, and we're not sure if we're gonna go for another at least 6 to 12 months with the same priorities, or will it change? But I think your point is correct, that this is probably very relevant for where BlaBlaCar is right now. We actually have some projects at BlaBlaCar that are much younger. For example, we're working on carpooling, but for shorter distances, for commuting. We also are launching a product of insurance for your car. Those are actually very, very early projects, very actually, startups that we're incubating in a way at BlaBlaCar. Their priorities change much faster than this, and it makes a lot of sense. So I do think the speed at which it would change is highly related to how mature your company or your project is.
Hi. So I have 2 questions. The first one is how did you do to adapt to the new countries where you try to implement the cultural differences? Yeah. And are you planning to go to Asia, because they have very different cultures? So I was just wondering if you do. Okay. Thanks.
So that's the thing, actually. That's interesting. The more you add complexity, the more likely something in this complex product is going to require some localization, right? So one way you actually reduce the need for localization is to reduce the amount of things that you're doing. So for example, I was showing earlier, there were 3 icons that have different colors. Actually, the color meaning highly changes, what a color represents, highly changes based on culture. So the more you start to use color to mean something, and the more you use different colors, the more likely you're going to have to adapt this to every country you are in. So reducing is actually, simplifying is a great way to reduce how much localization you need to do. We surprisingly don't do a lot of specific adaptations for different markets. So we're available in 22 countries, and it goes from Brazil to Russia to India to Italy to Germany to Ukraine. Very, very little differences. And the reason is, I think that what we try to solve are universal problems. Like, if you're going to go into the car of a stranger, there are some basic human principles that you have to comply with in order for people to trust you in doing that. And yes, there can be some small differences per market, per culture, but a lot of the things we try to address are universal things. And actually, I think that simplification is usually the path to finding your core. I haven't read it, but I heard there's a book called Essentialism, and it talks a lot about simplification, and it's about finding the essence of who you are by removing everything that actually is not necessary. And I think this is a lot of what we've done at BlaBlaCar, is removing a lot of the layers that felt actually unnecessary and were actually complexity. A lot of time actually optimized for the French market, but that were not really necessary for the French market, and were definitely not relevant for the other ones. So by removing a lot of things that were country specific, you can actually scale in other markets faster. To your second question, we are a bit present in Asia, but it's not right now. It's not a key focus to expand in other markets. So we're going to stick with the footprint we have right now. Another example of focus. I mean, for the past 10 years, a lot of the work was done in getting into other markets. And right now we believe that we already have a huge footprint. Let's do a much better job at serving the people using BlaBlaCar in those markets. So for example, on the list of things we could talk about, but we have decided not to focus on, market expansion is one of them.
Now, on the previous note of business development and international expansion, do you feel as if the C-suite level in the business development team are really shaping the way for product owners and developers to actually, categorize the simplicity? Whereas, if your solution, if your system or your software or your hardware, whatever it may be, is causing finding a solution in a pain point, do you feel as if that business development focus is saying to the product dev guys, we need to focus on this pain point, so from this standpoint, please develop the system to really maximize and highlight this problem being solved? My second question is the fact that what are you doing right now in connection with your business development department at BlaBlaCar? Is there a very accurate synchronicity, or is there a lot of lag in that connection between business development and product development?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm sharing is very frustrating for a lot of business developers, because their goal a lot of the time is precisely to bring more business, by adding new partnership, new connections. So the way I think we're making it work is precisely by having those company priorities where the business development is happening based on those priorities, right? So actually, whenever they come up with an opportunity, a deal that is super interesting, but is not one of those priorities, we don't do it. And they don't need a lot of time to actually get that, and then to optimize for partnerships that are going to accelerate, our roadmap or our growth or our projects on the company priorities. So I think there was a bit of friction when we put that in place, when we put a phonetic focus in place, precisely because before it was a bit of kind of a grabble type of mentality where just go wherever you can find a deal and we'll try to make it work. And we realized that actually we were not able to deliver on those. So suddenly you make promises and then you're not able to deliver on it. So this is where we realized that we had to make the hard choices about what type of opportunities are we actually after. And if we are finding great opportunities on those key priorities, we will put resources behind them. On topics that are in the avoid at all cost list, we will not. And that's why it matters a lot to agree, not at a product level, but at a company level, so that the product and the marketing and the sales and the customer service, everything is optimized, and you reduce a lot of friction by having a priority level that is at the maximum and across all the different functions of your company.
So you just acquired Weebus? I'm here. Wait.
Sorry.
You just acquired Weebus. So what's your main challenge at the moment in integrating them into your framework? And are you considering that a whole different product, or are you integrating that into the existing product as a feature?
So we haven't figured this one out yet, and there's multiple scenarios on the table. I guess the question is more. I think we're pretty clear on the vision. We're debating how do we get there, right? So the main reason why we decided to make an offer to acquire Rebus was we discovered that a lot of people that were using BlaBlaCar, they were using one day BlaBlaCar, the other day buses, right? And they were making their decision based on price, based on availability, based on proximity, based on a couple of criteria. And when I was saying earlier, there is competition for BlaBlaCar, bus was the most direct competition. And we realized that, well, if that's what we think are carpool users, actually they're just people, and they want to have choice between carpool and buses, then we should facilitate their life and actually offer both on our platform. So this insight, which led us to acquire Rebus, gives you the answer of the vision. You need to have one product, right? You need to have both carpool and buses offer on the same platform, otherwise you're not making their life easier. So the vision for sure is that ultimately you will be able to find everything that Webus and that BlaBlaCar have been offering on the same platform. Now, how do we get there? We don't know. How does this new product integrating both would work? We don't know either. So these are exactly the kind of things that we're working on hand in hand with Webus.
Hey, in the context of phonetic focus, how do you make young ideas that are still not priorities? How do you help them grow? Because you're talking about insurance and small distance ride sharing. How come you're working on it if it's not part of your 3 priorities?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think that there's a book called The Innovator's Dilemma that kind of gives the answer. Whenever you become a big enough company and you want to trigger innovation, the one thing that you want to do is to take a team working on it and totally separate it from every other resource, right? So this is what we've done for the 2 topics I was talking about, commuting and insurance. They are separate business units, and they're not a distraction for those key priorities. Like it's almost an independent company, and we spend very little time trying to make them work. They have their own budget, they have their own roadmap. It could be a totally independent startup. The reason why we want to do it ourselves is potentially sometimes we can help them, but that's about it. And I think that's the topics that we allow ourselves to have are the topics that we're willing to give full autonomy and full resources to achieve their goals, which is not the case of all the other topics that I was mentioning earlier. For example, the topic of trust, I can't create this trust startup that would work independently of the rest of BlaBlaCar. This is not possible. So if you're not able to do this, then you should make the hard decision. If you're able to kind of almost spin it off, then maybe you have an opportunity to have another topic, but that will require very little distractions on your top 3 priorities.
What about vocal interfaces? Because you are speaking essentially about graphical landing pages, app pages or web pages. But in the vocal app context, you don't propose an entry. It's only a microphone for the user. So simplification is not needed. You can have all the functionalities for the user. What do you think about that?
So I'm not an expert on this topic, so I can give you my answer, but it's definitely not an expert answer. I think that vocal interfaces, this is what you're referring to, right? I think that there are limitations, in terms of scaling, is that precisely because they don't propose you an interface, it means that you have to internalize the interface in your brain, and I do think that this is a limit of the whole vocal system, and one way or the other, the amount of complexity you can internalize about how you can interact with it is going to be limited. So what are the prompts, what are the options that will be available that you need as a user to know by heart, because the screen cannot be a reminder of what you can do, is going to constrain what you need to do. So even though it is not a visible, like a visual interface, when you're working on it, you have to actually look at all the things you could do. And I would be surprised if the people that are working on it don't have to do the same type of hard choices that we're talking about. Again, that being said, I'm not an expert, so maybe you should have Vladimir. Let's have someone working on vocal interfaces come on stage, talk about this, because I really have no expertise on this topic.
Thank you.
Okay, last question. Okay, sorry.
Hello, I have 2 questions. First one, sorry, what would be your references, if you have, in terms of product simplicity? And the second one, do all these rules, according to you, apply also to technical roadmaps?
So an example of product simplicity. I mean, the company that has been very famous for their obsession about simplicity is Apple, and the book that I was talking about, Insanely Simple, is the demonstration of how you get there. And I think that the title is very nice because at one point in the book, the author says, trying to be insanely simple is simply insane. Like, it's just crazy to try to do that. And I think that their success is partially, not only, but partially, coming from that. And as I've been switching, smartphones, and there is a level of, intuitiveness from some of their product that I think is a great demonstration. I think they're amazing at making hard decisions. I was actually watching the other day one of the last big conference talks from Steve Jobs, and it was at the time where Flash was a big thing, right? And they took the decision at Apple to not support Flash display on the browsers on their iPad, and it was causing a lot of chaos and a lot of frustration. And Steve Jobs was explaining how much a product needs to have a point of view. And their point of view was, we believe Flash is a dead technology. It's going to die, over the course of the coming years. He could have been totally wrong. And he was honest about it. He was like, we're making a bet, and we think that, in terms of technology, investing in Flash is the wrong thing. The amount of support that you have to provide for such a technology is way too high compared to other emerging technologies. And turns out he was totally right on this very specific topic. But I think more than the fact that it was right or wrong, he could have been wrong. They've been wrong on other decisions. I think what they've been amazing and talking about it and sometimes mocked about it is their demonstrating over time ability to make hard decisions that at the beginning piss off people. And so I think, I could find more niche topic, but this one I think is the best one because it's the best demonstration ever of how much you can, have a point of view, be obsessed about simplicity, and scale. And they've reached an interesting scale. Second question was? Correct. So I'm not a technical expert, so I wouldn't have the expert answer. So we're very lucky at Blablacar because our VP of engineering worked for 12 years at Apple. So I don't have to spend any time convincing him about why simplicity matters. So I'm not sure it's exactly the same techniques, but that being said, the phonetic focus for sure. And actually, when I talk about the roadmap, most of the roadmap we're talking about is engineering roadmap. When you limit the amount of things you're going to put on the interface as a designer, you are going to make life easier from the people that are actually going to implement it. One method that we've been using a lot at Blablacar for the past 2 years is the creation of a design system. And this design system is the same design system from a design and from an engineering standpoint. And it's a great example also of a complexity antibody in the sense that you make hard decisions about how your component works, and then you replicate them, and that limits vastly the complexity of your entire product from an interface standpoint. So my intuition is that yes, it would totally apply to technical projects, but I'm not the greatest expert on that.
Pure la famille.